I was 2 days into a solo hiking trip through the Bitterroot Mountains when I saw the tent. It was an old canvas model, green, slightly weathered, zipped all the way up, and planted just off the trail near a patch of tall pines. What struck me first was how clean the area around it looked. No boot prints, no gear, no fire pit, just a tight, sealed tent standing like it had been dropped from the sky. At first I thought someone had left it behind, but the ground around the stakes was freshly pressed, and a loop of paracord was still tied to a nearby tree, taut. Whoever had set it up did so recently and with care, but there were no signs of them nearby. No rustling, no voices, no movement in the trees. I waited for 20 minutes, then walked a slow circle around the tent. It was completely zipped, no gaps or rips, and not a sound came from inside. I knocked on the nylon, gently, once. Nothing. Out of instinct or caution, maybe both, I backed away and decided to make camp a few hundred feet downhill. Close enough to keep watch, far enough to pretend I wasn't watching. That night, the forest felt wrong. No wind, no birds, just stillness broken only by the occasional snap of twigs that came too regularly to be random. I didn't sleep much. At one point, when I shined my light back toward the hill, the green tent was still there, zipped tight, untouched. But I noticed something on the ground outside it, a small, dark shape that hadn't been there earlier. In the morning, I hiked back up. The object on the ground was a photo, black and white, torn at the edges. It showed a man standing in front of a cabin, his face half in shadow. I didn't recognize him, but on the back, someone had written a name in red ink, my name. I didn't touch the photo. I left it where it lay, half buried in pine needles. For an hour I sat just outside the range of the tent, watching it, waiting for something, any movement, any noise. Nothing came. The tent remained zipped, its canvas still. Around noon I hiked 2 miles out to higher ground, found cell signal, and called the ranger station. I gave them coordinates and said I'd spotted an abandoned tent and wanted to report it, just in case. They said someone would check it out the following morning. That didn't help. When I got back to camp, the photo was gone. The tent was still there, still zipped, but the ground around it looked disturbed, slightly raked, like someone had tried to erase footsteps. I looked for prints and saw only mine. That night I didn't sleep. I kept my flashlight in hand, sat with my back to a tree, and waited. Just after 2 a.m. the sound came, not loud, but distinct. A zipper, moving slowly, not all the way open, just a soft, deliberate hiss of fabric shifting teeth, then stillness. I couldn't see the tent directly from where I sat. I debated shining my light, but something in me hesitated. Like the moment you pause before opening a door you don't remember closing. At sunrise I approached again. The tent was zipped shut, but something had changed. A small trail of pine needles, curved like someone had walked in a tight arc, led from the entrance to a tree nearby. I followed it. Behind the trunk, wedged between 2 roots, was a second photo. It was the same man as before, same cabin. But this time he was closer to the camera. His face was visible, gaunt, sunken, eyes staring through the lens, like he'd been dead for days. The back had no writing, but the paper smelled faintly of old smoke. That evening, I set up my phone on a tripod and pointed it at the tent, recording through the night. I didn't expect much. just hoped to capture proof that something was moving. In the morning, I checked the footage. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the tent zipper moved. Only a few inches, just enough to break the seal. A hand slipped out. Not quickly, not aggressively. Just reached out and placed something on the ground in front of the tent. Then retreated. The hand didn't look injured or monstrous. Just human, pale, calm, deliberate. At the end of the footage, the item placed outside the tent was still there. When I looked in real life, it was gone. But something else had been left in its place. A third photograph, face down, resting against the same tree as before. It was a picture of me, taken the night before. I burned the photo. I didn't recognize the angle it had been taken from. It showed me crouched by my fire, back half turned, one arm raised, as if scratching my neck. The timestamp matched the exact minute I'd looked over my shoulder, thinking I'd heard something behind me. The composition was perfect, not rushed, not accidental. I waited all morning for the ranger to arrive. No one came. Just after noon, I packed everything I had, shouldered my gear, and walked straight back up the hill to the tent. I was done waiting. The zipper resisted at first, like it hadn't been moved in years. Then it gave way. Inside, the air was stale. Not rotten, just heavy. There was a sleeping bag, flattened and stained, pressed into a bed of dry pine needles, a backpack, a tin mug with flakes of rust, a Polaroid camera with no film, and along the back wall, pinned up with tiny nails, were photographs, dozens, hundreds, some curled, some fresh, all black and white. Each photo was of a different person, some taken outside, some indoors, some candid, others posed. A few were faded like they'd been exposed to the elements, but many looked recent, crisp edges, clean contrast. None of the faces were smiling. One image had a sticky note attached, a name, a date, coordinates, mine. There was no sign of the man from the earlier photos. No food, no water, no personal belongings beyond the camera. I opened the backpack and found more photos, all unmarked, and a logbook that tracked days, times, and GPS points scrawled in tight handwriting. Some entries were crossed out, some were underlined. I took none of it with me. I hiked out without stopping, didn't sleep that night. Didn't tell anyone beyond the ranger station, who filed the report, then stopped returning my calls. I never saw the incident mentioned online, not even in missing persons reports. 2 weeks later, a manila envelope arrived in my mailbox, no return address. Inside, a single photo. It showed me asleep in my apartment, face half turned toward the camera. Taken through the window, probably from the fire escape. There was no note, no smudge, no prints. Just a thin line of red ink drawn beneath the image, a timestamp, and the words, "Not your turn yet." He moved into the building for the quiet. 3 apartments total, 1 on each floor, old brownstone construction from the 1920s, with thick walls and narrow staircases. His was the middle unit. The upstairs neighbor was a retired trucker who rarely came home, always off visiting family in different states. The downstairs tenant was a silent man in his 70s who never seemed to leave. The landlord described the place as practically private and promised it would feel more like a house than an apartment. For the first 2 months, it did. He worked from home, wrote code, kept to himself. The building was quiet enough to hear plumbing clicks and old wood creak under temperature changes, but not much else. No footsteps overhead, no music bleeding through the walls. A near-perfect silence until it wasn't. It started with movement, faint late-night rustling, not above or below him, but beside. Behind the far wall of his kitchen, where there should have been nothing, just insulation and brick. He assumed it was an animal at first. Maybe a squirrel had gotten into the walls, but then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate. Never fast enough to startle, but never light enough to ignore. They didn't match the cadence of the old man below or the trucker above. They came from that same blank wall. He asked the landlord about it, half joking. The man brushed it off. Old buildings settle in weird ways. But he added something else, something that didn't sit right. Only 2 other apartments, like I said. Yours is the middle. You've got one neighbor above, one below. That's it. The floor plan confirmed it. No adjacent units, no storage space, no service hallway. Just the one wall that shared itself with ... nothing. But the sounds continued. Some nights they grew bolder furniture dragging, soft thuds, the rustle of plastic or fabric. It didn't happen every night, only once every few days. But it began to feel timed, as if someone or something was trying to avoid detection. He started marking the times. Always between 2 o'clock and 3, and always under 10 minutes. Always followed by absolute silence. Eventually, curiosity shifted into concern. He installed a small security camera in the hallway, aimed at his apartment door. Nothing fancy, just motion detection and time-stamped recordings. Days passed with nothing unusual. Then came the first anomaly. At 2:17 a.m., the camera detected motion. A figure stood directly in front of his door. Still, head lowered, the face hidden. No knock, no sound, no attempt to open the door. Just a figure, motionless for nearly 7 minutes. Then it turned and walked out of frame. When he checked the hallway that morning, nothing was disturbed. No footprints on the dusty mat. The door was still locked, but something had changed. There was a faint, almost imperceptible scrape on the lock. Not damage, more like wear, the kind that comes from precision use over and over, almost mechanical. He tried brushing it off, but it itched at him, kept him up nights. And now, even during the day, he thought he heard soft sounds behind the kitchen wall, like breathing, like waiting. He began to notice patterns, repeated sounds, subtle shifts in his environment. A mug moved slightly on the counter, a cabinet door not quite closed the way he left it. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would hold up in conversation. But things changed incrementally, like someone entering carefully, silently, always restoring just enough to avoid suspicion. He changed his locks. He installed a second camera inside the apartment, hidden near the ceiling, aimed at the kitchen. He kept it to himself. No mention to the landlord, no talk with neighbors. He needed to know whether he was imagining it or if someone really was getting inside. The footage ran clean for 6 days. He checked obsessively, watched hours of still, quiet footage. On the 7th day, he caught something. At 2:11 a.m., the camera glitched for exactly 6 seconds. Not skipped, glitched. The time code warped, and a smear of digital noise bled across the image. When the feed returned, the kitchen light was off. He never turned it off at night. He rewatched it again and again. There was no jump cut, no obvious tampering, but something had triggered the camera's error, something inside the apartment. The next day he tore open the kitchen wall. Behind the drywall was nothing unusual, at first old studs, insulation, aged brick. But the lower section felt hollow. He tapped, then pushed. One panel gave way to a cavity no wider than a crawl space. He slid a flashlight inside and saw a small recess 2 feet high, maybe 3 feet deep, lined with dust and grime. And at the far end, pressed into the shadow, a blanket, folded. Beside it, an old tin plate, a plastic bottle, a neatly stacked pile of paper scraps. Someone had been living there. The realization didn't come like a shock. It came cold and quiet, like breath fogging a mirror. Whoever they were, they had access. They'd been moving carefully, watching, waiting, using that hidden space not just to hide, but to observe. The paper scraps were receipts, mostly groceries dated over the past 5 months, some from a store across the city, others with no store name at all, just item codes and amounts. All of them had one thing in common, his apartment number scribbled on the back. He replaced the wall before nightfall. No police, no landlord. He told himself he'd report it once he knew more. But the truth was simpler. He wasn't ready to invite anyone in. Not yet. That night he didn't sleep. Every sound was amplified, every creak a warning. And at 2 a.m., like clockwork, he heard it again, barely audible. The sound of breathing, right behind the wall. He stayed awake the next few nights, too wired to sleep. The sounds came and went, sometimes breathing, sometimes faint shifting, like cloth brushing concrete. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, but always there, always between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m., and always behind the same stretch of wall, the crawl space. He'd sealed it the best he could, reinforced the drywall, even wedged a dresser in front of it. But the knowledge alone that someone had lived there recently and deliberately ate at him. More than once he caught himself staring at the wall for hours, waiting for movement that never came. On the 4th night, he left the apartment. He waited on the street outside, hidden across the road in his car, watching the building's main entrance through the windshield. It was just past 2 when he saw it. A man, average build, hooded sweatshirt, entered with a key, moved quietly, confidently. Not the landlord, not either of the neighbors. He didn't ring any buzzers. He didn't knock. He just walked in like he belonged, and 10 minutes later he left. The man carried nothing, left no sign, but the timing matched, and the pattern was too exact. Someone had been using his apartment, possibly living inside its walls, and returning like it was routine. He waited until morning to act. This time he ripped out the crawl space wall completely, exposing the whole cavity. It was larger than he thought. Not just a small nook, a narrow tunnel had been carved out behind the kitchen wall, extending along the base of the building. Inside he found bedding, wrappers, a burner phone with no SIM, and detailed notes, written in pencil on yellowing notebook paper. They weren't notes about him. They were about the building. Names, dates, times people left their units. What groceries they brought in, when they took out trash, how long they showered, pages and pages of it. He flipped back through entries going months back, and then years. Some of the handwriting was different, faded, older. This wasn't one person's obsession. It was something passed down, He reported everything, to the landlord, to the police, to anyone who would listen. They found the tunnel extended further than expected, connecting to a sealed maintenance corridor that hadn't been on the original building plans. It was likely meant for electrical access. Over time, someone had turned it into a hidden living space. No one was arrested. The man on the camera was never identified. The handwriting couldn't be matched to anyone, and though they sealed the passage for good, there was no proof the intruder hadn't just moved on to another wall, another building, another space people forgot to look behind. He moved out 2 weeks later, and every apartment he's lived in since, he taps on the walls at night, not for ghosts, not for superstition, just to be sure they're solid, just to be sure he's truly alone. Because now he knows, in buildings this old, not every space is mapped, not every wall is a barrier. And sometimes you're not the only one who calls your apartment home.